Hello friends and welcome back to another React Hooks video. Today we are going to talk about context hooks and how we can have a global state so we can receive and send information from distant parents without passing it as props. So if you've worked with Vue.js before, this is similar to stores. So let's get started. I've created my project using Vite, and inside that project I have three components that are very simple. An app component that has only one h1 and it is going to be the parent, and then a posts component that has also some text, and a form that is actually just an input field. In the root component, which is app, I want to have a user state. So I'm going to create this using the use a state hook and set the initial value to John. Now I want to use this inside my form as a value. For this, I can use props. Let's say the post component is inside the root component, and inside the post component, we are going to use the form. And now we want to send down this user to the form through these steps or through the component tree. So on the post, we can say user is going to be user as a prop, and then accept it in the posts component and then send it down to the form. And of course, in the form on the input field, we want to accept it as a value. Let's make sure we accept it as a prop first and then the value, and then we get John, of course, in that input field. We have a warning because we don't have unchanged event on this input field. So this works in a very simple small example, but imagine we have a bunch of components and they are nested within each other. This approach would be prone to mistakes and very time consuming. This is where context comes in. With context, we can create our global variables or state and then use them in the child components. So there are two steps in using the context. One is creating it and then using it. To create a context, we would use the create context function from React. So we need to import it, and I'm just logging it into the console to see what we get first. We get an object with a bunch of properties. This is in fact a component that we can wrap our whole component tree with it and then use this provider property to send the data and share it with the component tree. So normally in a real world application, we would have an external file. I'm just going to call it my contexts, and I'm going to use JS extension because I would have only JavaScript, no markup. So I can create my contexts using the create contexts, and again make sure we are importing it from React and then export this one so we can use it in any component we want. And that's all. That is all we have to do to create our contexts. Now again, this is a component so we can use it in our app. So let's import it first. So right on the very top, I'm going to import my contexts from that file that I just created, and instead of console.log that function, I'm going to console.log our created context. This is going to give us the same thing because we are just saving this function inside a variable. Now, instead of passing these empty tags, I'm going to use this my contexts and use the provider property on it and then close the tag down here. So I can get rid of this console.log, and on this provider, we have a value prop. Now this value is the heart of the context, if you will. So whatever we provide inside this value would be available throughout the component tree that is wrapped with this component. Let's say I just want to send the string Mike. So this is just a simple primitive data that I want to share with the whole component tree, and I want to see how I can grab this value in other components, for example, in the form. So inside the form component, I'm going to get rid of this user and also this value. And the first thing I want to do, console.log use contexts from React, and this time I don't want to invoke it because that would give me an error. Use context, you can see it's a function that expects a context, and we need to pass that. If I invoke it without passing it, this is going to give me an error because that context needs to be passed. And the context we want to use for our application, for our component, is the context we just created. So we need to import it and just pass it down inside this function as an argument. Now if I save this one, we get the value which we passed to the provider. So you get the idea. So we can access anything we pass inside this value anywhere within the component tree using the useContext hook. So this is creating it and this is using it. Now instead of console.log, let's just save const user and then use it in our input field. So I want to say value is going to be user. So of course we're going to see Mike inside the input field. Now this is again hard-coded, so we can just easily replace it with user. We get John because that is our initial state. Now since we are using the context, we don't have to use these props anymore. So we can delete them from here. I can go to the post. I can delete it here too, because this post component has nothing to do with it. And inside the post, we are able to grab that user. Now, let's say we want to update that state using this set user. So instead of passing just one value, I'm going to pass an object that would contain user and set user. Now back in our form, if I console.log this once again, just to show you what we get an object where user is John and we have a function for set user. So this is basically our state available inside the form. So we know it's an object, so we can easily destructure it and say user and then set user. And then on the unchanged event of our input field, we can grab the event, use an anonymous function, invoke the set user, and pass that target value as our new value for the user. So I can get rid of this console. Let's refresh. So all the errors and warnings are gone. So if I type in here, we are updating our state. Now we are not outputting it. So if I just output it down here, user, and you can see it's up there. And as I type in here, it's being updated. So even though the form is in a whole new component and the state is in the root, just because we are providing this value and using this context, we can easily work with our state from any component. Now let's have another example, and we are going to have posts to show it on this component and then add to the post using this component, so using this form. So back in our app, instead of user and set user, I'm going to have posts and set posts, and as an initial value, I'm going to have an array with one object in it. So it's going to have an ID and a title that says post 1. That's it. That is just one object that is going to be one post inside of an array. So now, instead of user and set user, because they don't exist anymore, I want to pass down the posts and the set posts, and I want to get rid of this output. So the first step is that I want to grab the posts inside this component and loop over them and show them on the screen. So let's grab the posts first. So I want to say const posts. We need to destructure it. Remember, it's an object, and use context, and then pass my context in here, and it's being auto imported for me. Right under the form, I can use the curly brackets and check if the post's length is greater than 0, then I want to do something. This is just to make sure that posts is not an empty array. So posts.map, and for every post, I'm going to have a markup that is going to be just a div where the key is post ID and then an h2 that is going to be post title. That's it. So let's save this one. We get our title for our first post, and we want to go to the form now and type inside this input field and have a button and add to the list. So let's add a button first. So down here, I'm just going to say btn add. Now this approach is not going to work because we changed our state to an array of objects. So in our form, I'm going to change this user and set user to posts and set posts. This part is the same. We don't need to change this. And then I don't need to update the value on the fly. I just want to get the value out. And I can do that using a ref and the useRef hook. So I can create a title variable and set it to useRef. And the useRef hook allows me to give reference to any element that I want to use it in my application. So I can pass the ref attribute to the input field and pass down that title. And now I can grab this anywhere I want to. So I don't need the unchange because I don't want to invoke any action when I am changing the input, but I want to have an unclick event and invoke the handle add function whenever I click on that button. So up here, I can create my function, handle add. It's going to be an arrow function, of course. And the first thing I want to do, I just want to log that title. So let's give it a refresh and save and click add. We get current input. So we get an object where the key is current and the value is our element that has the ref on it. So we want to grab the current value because we know input fields have a value. So let's save it, type something here, press add, we get that value, and we want to use this one inside our set posts. So I'm going to cut this and get rid of the console and use the set posts and invoke the function. So we need to add to our state, which is this posts. But remember, state in React is read only. So we need to return a new array. So we want to destructure the posts, whatever they are, and then add a new object. The object we want to add is going to have an ID, let's say 2. I'm going to change this in a moment. And the title is going to be title current value, which is this one. Now for the ID, because we cannot have the same ID for multiple children, I'm going to create a next ID variable up here, set it to 2, And every time we click on this button, I'm going to increment that. We would not get an error. And that's all we have to do to add to our state. So let's save this one. Let's give it a refresh and see how this works. I'm going to say post 2, press add. Post 3, add. Post some number, press add, and I can do this as many times as I want. And that's basically how we can use the contexts in React. So to recap, we can create our contexts using the create context function in React that gives us a component, and we can wrap our component tree with the context component and use the provider property on it and pass the value prop. Now, whatever we pass inside the value, it's going to be available for all the children inside our provider context or context provider, whichever way we want to look at it. And in order to grab this value inside the children, we can use the use context hook and save the return inside a variable and use it in whatever way we want to. And that's all about it, guys. I hope this video was helpful and you enjoyed it. And thank you for watching. See you at the next one. Bye bye.